Okay, so let's get into it. I'm going to close out the chat. So again, just as a reminder to everyone, if you have a question, please use the Q&A so that I can access that later on and see your questions. It is possible that your question might be answered during the session, so just keep that in mind, and we will get to as many questions as we can. So let's dive into it. Welcome everyone to Leveling Up Your Conversation Design Career. My name is Hillary Black, and today we are going to be answering all of your questions about how you can go from either an aspiring or entry-level conversation designer to a more senior level or lead role. So as I said, my name's Hillary. If you don't know me, I work for a conversational AI product company that is called Mav. I help people design SMS chatbots for sales. I also am a content creator and a community host of Conversation Designers Internet Club, both on Facebook and Twitter. I'm the founder of conversationdesignerjobs.com, which is a job board specifically for conversation design. So if you are looking for a job, make sure that you check that out. I also noticed there's a little typo here, but it is conversationdesignerjobs.com, and you can create a candidate profile there to be able to get matched with your ideal conversation design job. So let me just quickly introduce our panelists, and they will then introduce themselves. We do have Sarah, who is a conversational designer at Coinbase. We have Taylor, who is a senior UX and conversation designer at Interactions. We have Kritika, who is a conversation and product design lead at Flipkart, and Shruti, who is a conversational UI content designer at Instacart. So you can see that there are a variety of job titles in this field, which I find to be kind of like the most interesting thing about it. But yeah, so let me just have each of our panelists, starting with Sarah, just introduce themselves and share a little bit about their background. I know our first question is about how you got into the field. So I think just chatting more about yourself and what you do.
Hi guys, my name's Sarah. I have a very untraditional background. I was an esthetician for 10 years before I got into conversation design. I freelanced for a bit, I worked in consultancy, and now I'm in-house at Coinbase, helping really underneath the CX channel strategy umbrella, which is a lot of fun.
Awesome. Taylor, you're up.
Hey everyone, my name's Taylor Henschel. I'm a senior UX and conversation designer at Interactions. Interactions is a conversational AI company that where we build really sophisticated IVAs in voice and chat channels. My background, I actually spent like 10 years in the civic sector, and I like to tell folks that I was designing, researching, and implementing citizen experiences. That ultimately led me to get a Master of Science in UX design. I had a fellowship with Microsoft doing civic design and innovation work. Spent some time with various other private sector companies. Outside of work, I'm really interested in space exploration. I also really love surfing around San Diego, as well as getting involved in LGBT rec sports.
Awesome. Kritika, you're up.
Hey everyone, Kritika here. So I have been in conversation design through and through in my entire professional career, and it has been very interesting for me because I did my master's in English literature and linguistics, and soon enough I went on to Samsung and I worked for their virtual assistant called Bixby. From there on, I was working for different regions like US, UK, India, and also creating voice interactions for different devices such as TV, watches, speaker, and our good old mobile. There I was serving just for one product and catering to that singular product. But then I moved on to GeoHaptic, where I was working with different industries such as e-commerce, gaming, and creating customer experiences, particularly on chatbot for those clients. And then now I have recently switched to Flipkart, where I'm leading conversation design efforts for their chatbot.
So you definitely have like the full gamut of experiences, I think, which is very interesting. And you're also joining us late at night from India as well.
Yeah,
late at night for me. And last but not least, Shruti, if you could introduce yourself.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Shruti. I'm a conversation designer at Instacart, which, if you're not familiar with the platform, it's basically a grocery delivery service. Before Instacart, I was at Apple, where I was a design producer intern on the Siri and Shortcuts team. So I worked very closely with conversation designers to create interactive experiences for Siri. And that was actually my first job out of college. Before that, I had graduated from Carnegie Mellon with degrees in psychology and decision science. So I also don't have the most conventional path into this space. And given that it's still so new and always changing, I can completely understand how there can be a lot of ambiguity in this field. So I'm really excited to be here and to answer your questions.
Yeah, I'm so excited to hear about your experience because you had pretty much what most people here would consider their dream internship. So I think that's definitely super valuable for all of the aspiring conversation designers here, whether you are a college student or otherwise. So actually, let's get into that question, which is how did you break into the conversation design space? So I think, like, Shruti, from your perspective, I'd be interested to hear one, kind of how you were interested in it and knew about it, but also how you made that switch from being an intern to then getting your full-time role now.
Yeah, no, for sure. This is a really great question and a really important one, I think, because I think you can break into conversation design with a lot of different backgrounds. I mean, whether you're like a writer or a psychologist or a linguist, I think there is space for you to create an opportunity here. Like I mentioned earlier, my path into this space hasn't been the most conventional. So in college, I actually studied child development psychology and decision science. And decision science, for those of you who might be unfamiliar, is a field of psychology where you kind of focus on how people make decisions and how they can make better decisions. It's a lot of like research and data science and that sort of thing. And then, of course, child development psychology is about studying children, how they learn language, their cognition, all of that. So when I was in college, I was actually really interested in becoming a therapist. I didn't know conversation design was like a job you could have and all that. So I, did a lot of like psych research, and I was a humanities major. So I like worked in the poetry department. I was on the newspaper staff. I just did like whatever appealed to me. So I didn't really have a lot of direction there. But Carnegie Mellon being a tech school, I was always surrounded by a lot of opportunity to get into the tech space. And I actually came across an opportunity to be an intern at a machine learning lab to create a socially aware assistant. And I saw this opportunity and I was like, okay, yeah, like whatever, that sounds cool, but I'm not an engineer, like I'm a psychologist, so I don't really know how I would contribute to this sort of project. But I applied anyway and I got it, and it was an unpaid internship, which I guess is how we all get started. But it was basically creating an assistant that recommends movies to people while building rapport with them. And my role as like the psychology, as a psychologist, was to like investigate how people build rapport. So I'd like read through like a ton of transcripts of people like talking about movies to each other. These are also like really old transcripts, those people recommending like Dances with the Wolves and stuff like that, like before my time. But anyway, I would like analyze these conversational strategies. I created a coding manual. I'd work with the engineers to implement it. I'd help write dialogue. It was all very, very academic. And at the time, I was also working at a child language learning lab where we'd study how children learn language. And while working in both these labs in tandem, I realized that there was a lot of overlap between the way we train machines to learn language and the way babies learn language. And there was a lot that ML could learn from cognitive psychology. And that was kind of a pivotal moment for me personally, when I really brought my psych background into the mix and realized that there were other career paths for me as a psychologist. And, it was really my first introduction to the space. And at the time, I didn't even know that what I was doing was conversation design. My official title was just research intern. So it was really only after I graduated college and I was looking for a job that I found out that conversation design was a job that you could actually have, that it paid well. It combined all my favorite things like writing, psychology, design, technology. And it was a really great place for a social science student like myself. And really, honestly, the rest is history. I got my internship at Apple by attending an engineering job fair that I didn't actually want to be at, but I was given a tip from my psychology advisor that there was like one recruiter there who was looking for social science students. It was a job fair that was primarily geared towards like engineering students. So I like stood in a really long line. I spoke to that recruiter for like 2 minutes. I forgot about it for a few weeks, got a call, had a bunch of interviews, had like 5 interviews for that. It was actually a pretty lengthy process. And then got the internship as at Apple as a design producer on the Siri and Shortcuts team. And design producer is basically a fancy name for like a project manager. So at the time I didn't actually design conversations, but I worked really closely with conversation designers on the team. So I got to learn a lot about the design process, project management, design tools, that kind of jazz. And yeah, and then I came here to Instacart and I love it. So that's a little bit about how I got introduced into the space, how I knew conversation design was a thing. And yeah, I'm happy to be here now.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And I feel like a very good tip for people here is like if you get the opportunity to go to a job fair, even if it is engineering, it might be kind of like your secret way in. So I definitely would suggest people do that too. So Sarah, how about you? How did you break into the space? Like I personally know your story a little bit, but I think it'd be really helpful for people.
Yeah, I agree with Shruti. I think there are a lot of different ways to get into the industry. And, a lot of people might have a perception that like you have to be like a college student to get like an internship to get your way in. But for me, like I didn't get into this until like I was in my early 30s. I had left aesthetics and had started or co-founded a beauty startup selling cosmetics direct to consumers. And it was a really saturated market. And so we were starting to use bots to engage our audience, attract new customers and market using Facebook Messenger bots through MiniChat. And that was really like my gateway of getting into the space. And I started to become really, really obsessed with it, not just from like a conversation design perspective, but needing to understand like the technical requirements behind creating one of these systems. Like the if this then that kind of logic was like this mental puzzle that I had never really got to practice before as an esthetician. And so I started freelancing and was freelancing on Upwork and really just getting any work I could do that was related to chatbots. And within Upwork, it's very much related to what people are looking for and the platforms they're wanting to use, which are typically sales and marketing driven. So I was getting experience on Intercom, MiniChat, a couple of others that have left my brain at this point.
I think Drift probably, right?
Yeah, Drift. That's the one that I completely forgot about. Drift was a really big one, but they become very limiting, especially like Drift, in my opinion, is very limiting because there's only so far you can take it versus when you're working with machine learning and NLU. But once I realized conversation design was a thing that businesses actually hired for, I was like, okay, like I really want to get into this. And I started, just applying everywhere, building out a portfolio based on like what I could throw together from the projects I had done with freelance clients. And that's when I started working in consultancy, which really exposed me to like a really wide range of use cases. I mean, what businesses are doing with bots is just so varied. It can be, there's a large niche within contact centers, but then you've got like Siri and Alexa or like app-driven experiences. So there's so many ways to get into the industry, and then there's so many paths you can take once you're in there. And we're just scratching the surface, which is really cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, it's very interesting because you taught yourself and you just went out and sort of found work in whichever ways that you could, which is something that a lot of people, especially aspiring, they kind of don't know how to get in. And I do think that like freelance opportunities are quite limiting. And they're like, there's not a lot of them. What people are looking for is often very specific, but I think if you can find a platform, like a no-code platform like ManyChat or something like that, and really master it, there could be some interesting ways that you could sort of work with businesses or even work with friends to like get examples for your portfolio and then use that to get to the next step and like get a job, right?
Exactly. And your resources actually were huge for me when I was like starting out and trying to figure out like genuinely, like they were so helpful when I was like trying to learn how all this worked.
Yeah, and that's kind of, why I created, especially why I created the community, is because a lot of us are out there and we have no idea, there's 100 people in here right now who are interested in conversation design, but learning the ins and outs of it, knowing, how to find jobs, knowing how to get your questions answered, what platforms to use. Those are a lot of questions that just did not have answers. So it's been helpful for me, and a learning experience for me to just like learn from everyone as well. So Taylor, how about you? How did you go from the civic sector into conversation design?
Well, I actually think it has a lot to do with what you were just talking about, which is community and like the power of our own networks. I was, after the civic sector, as I mentioned, I enrolled in grad school where I was getting my master's in UX design. I've always enjoyed writing and thought that UX writing could sort of be a neat intersection for me. So I remember like getting coffee with my faculty advisor at the time about it. And that's when he mentioned conversation design, and specifically his spouse, who is like this like 20-year expert in conversation design. One of the folks that was like in it before, like it was even called conversation design or UX design for that matter. So I ended up like getting coffee with his spouse, was like super inspired. Fast forward, I think it must have been like a year or two later. I was out of grad school, I was employed. This employer was looking to jumpstart a conversation design practice at the company for the first time. Because of my background in innovation and like my expressed interest in UX writing, he ended up reaching out to me and asking me to lead it. I agreed. And then we also agreed to hire an expert to help sort of like mentor me and like guide the jumpstart of the program. That mentor ended up being the spouse of my faculty advisor, who I had met 2 years later. Her name is Susan. She's incredible. After Susan and I worked together at that employer, Susan left to take a director level role at another company called Interactions, which is where I currently am. And I ultimately ended up joining Susan here, where I've been for the last year or so.
That's awesome. That's such a cool like way to come back. Yeah, networking and you never know, who you're going to meet along the way. I think especially those early roles, and it is like so incredibly important to have a mentor.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah. So Kritika, I know you said in your intro that you have always been in the conversation design space for your professional career, but I would love to sort of hear how you even found out about it in the first place, and how you navigated yourself into this space.
So it was completely, I would call, a happy accident, because I had already completed my dissertation in African literature and I was writing SOPs for my PhD. I knew that I'm going to be a professor one day because that's what English literature gives you. But I also was always interested in linguistics. I read psycholinguistics, forensic linguistics, phonetics, and all of that. And I always felt that, I wish I could use that as well in whatever journey I'm going to take on. So one day Samsung was there to hire everyone. They were looking for people, quote unquote, linguists to help them build Bixby. And I was like, okay, let me give it a shot. Let's see how the corporate thing works. And I went there and I got hired. And initially I was just looking into, okay, what are intents? What are entities? And I was tagging all these thousands of utterances and seeing how people say things. And one day, one of the designers just came up to me and said that, hey, you have a background in linguistics and literature, right? I was like, yes, we are trying to, revamp the Bixby persona and we really need your input. And that's how I started working on Bixby persona. And whatever persona that we have today, I'm very proud to say that I'm one of the key contributors to it. And once the persona was done and people were like, okay, then we need to now create a unifying experiences for all the devices across. And since you are one of the person who has built it, you need to take care of it. So that way, then suddenly I started, like earlier we were just catering to the US audience, then it went on to UK, then India. And from then on, I am here right now. I
That's
just kept working
awesome.
on it. Like initially it was voice interaction, and then I worked with Haptic. I got to know chatbot. I got to work with so many different platforms: WhatsApp, Google Business, Facebook Messenger, so many platforms and so many experiences to create. And it was just so enriching. And initially, when I was working with Samsung, nobody knew what conversation designer is. And I always used to sit and think that, whatever work I do, it really needs to have a name. Like I'm
Yeah.
just sitting here a linguist, I'm not actually doing the linguist job. And then thanks to LinkedIn, I search everyone, and I did message you as well. And because I wanted to break into the space, not knowing that I'm already in this space. And from then on, my journey started, and it's still going on.
Yeah, I remember when you messaged me and just being like, you already are this. And a lot of times I'll say that to people, they'll message me, say, I'm this background or this background, I'm doing these things. And I'm like, okay, you already are a conversation designer. You just need the permission to call yourself that, I think,
Right.
sometimes.
Right.
Yeah. That's awesome. Well, yeah, I had also kind of a happy accident as well, getting into the field. I was an English major as well, and I ended up working in social media. And through that, I was freelancing, and one of my clients was like, "Hey, we want to create this messenger chatbot." And so, since I could write, status updates for Facebook, I was like, "This doesn't sound very different." So I also, didn't really know, like any of us at the time, that conversation design was a thing, that it was called that, that you could do that. And so I just tried it for the first time, and then I fell in love with it, like all of us. And here I am, like 6 years later, still doing it. So yeah, it's definitely been interesting, and just a really great ride, I would say. Um, Okay, so now that this is sort of more geared towards, how can people go from just having your first role, whether that's internship, entry level, freelance, whatever it is, to, being a senior level person, but also like, what are the differences? Like, what does it really mean to become a senior level designer? And what does it mean to just have your responsibilities sort of evolve, and even, what you're doing, like, are you managing people, et cetera, in your day to day? So Taylor, how would you say that your responsibilities and like your daily life has sort of shifted and evolved, from your first design role, or even just like when you first started at Interactions versus today?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I actually think my answer might surprise you a little bit, from my first role to my current role. So going back to how I got into conversation design, it was this like innovation area for the company. It was like extremely poorly defined, is how I would describe it. Like, let alone, like, of course, there was like no HR classification for the role, nothing like with any sort of structure around it. It was basically like, we have this project, like, we need you to like figure out how to get it done, sort of a deal. So like, as a result, like I spent a lot of time as like I like to say I was like a lone designer, like working amongst like a lot of devs, like on a wide variety of like smaller like demo projects to essentially like prove the capability and like the value to the enterprise. That's like in really stark contrast to now, where I'm on a team of like nearly like 20 like deep conversational like specialists, that all like regularly like work very closely together and collaborate. Sort of along those lines. So I think like the biggest difference in responsibility of then versus now is actually the amount of time that I spend on internal advocacy. And I think maybe that's the answer that might surprise people. With my first role, since it was new to the organization, I was constantly having to like advocate for the value of the work I was being asked to do, and constantly having to like prove out like the need for like expansion of resources to keep doing it and to do it better, to scale it essentially. And let me like say, I think advocacy is like a huge part of any designer's role. But in an organization that is more mature in conversation design, where it's already been like widely accepted and scaled out, I think you'll find that you devote more of your time to justifying your design choices versus justifying the value add of conversation design, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I would 100% agree that it's like, now that this has been more accepted in business use cases, it's more about why are you deciding to do this? But also like, why is this taking a long time? Why can't we just jump and go straight into building? Like, why do we have to be slowed down by, needing to make changes? All of those types of things.
Yep, absolutely. And then to, I guess, like briefly touch on like the question of like when I started at Interactions, which was like honestly only a year ago versus now, I think when I started, obviously like I was a contributor more than anything, but I think after getting my footing, and learning like the basics, like that's then when I had the opportunity to inject a little bit more like leadership or thought leadership into the work that I'm doing. And that comes from how my background is actually different than a lot of the other designers on the team. It comes from like me being a little bit more of a multidisciplinary designer with my UX background.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's been a really useful asset to bear at the company.
Yeah, absolutely. So this actually kind of pairs with our next question that I had wanted to ask Sarah, and actually all of you too. But Sarah, especially because I know you started with ManyChat. How have you found that through the different roles that you've had, and even through freelancing too, the general process, and this could be too like the makeup of the team or your role in it and your responsibilities and the tools that you've used, how has that sort of changed from role to role? Like, I'm not sure if you want to touch on, what you're using currently, but even just like the difference in like the variety of tools that you've both had to learn, and what you've found has really been the best way to approach design in your current role.
Yeah, so with freelancing, it was really just using whatever free tools I could get my hand on. And the platforms I was building on was really client dependent. Like if someone, honestly, you're selling yourself, and if someone asks you if you can do something on a particular platform, you tell them yes, and you're just going to figure it out as you go.
Yeah.
And then when I moved to consulting, it was a large team. I think we went from 5 to 10 over the year that I was at the consulting firm. So, and we had different disciplines. Like some of us were conversation designers, some of us were UX/conversation design, doing IVRs and chatbots. But we used a lot of Lucidchart and Figma. We were building on Salesforce Einstein and Amazon Connect. But a lot of those processes were centered around like one and done projects, like when you're working on an SOW for a single client, and it was less centered around like scaling and working within a single ecosystem. So now at Coinbase, we're using similar tools while we're kind of developing our own in-house suite of products. So that we have more control over the experience, which is really nice, because one of the things I've learned is that out of the box, like a lot of platforms are very limiting, whether it's around reporting or UI UX features that you want, but especially reporting. And it's really nice as a conversation designer to have this like huge like tool chest of different things to tap into for your designs. And then, coming from a really large design team to Coinbase, where we're a small like team right now that's going to be growing, we're really focused on creating like systems and processes that are going to support us as a team so that nothing slips through the cracks, but also allows us to scale globally, educate stakeholders, kind of like how Taylor was saying, because there is some advocacy and having stakeholders and the business understand, you can't move super quick on all these things. There's got to be a strategy to it, or one, you're at risk of launching really bad customer experiences, or just creating a lot of design and technical debt for yourself as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that the importance of sort of going from those entry-level roles to a more senior role is that you understand all of that, and you know better like how to estimate how a project is going to evolve, how long it's going to take, and you can really articulate more of why it's important to not just rush things. And that's something that really only comes with experience.
Totally. And I think if you can get into consulting, I think it's a really great gateway, because it'll help you figure out the things that you like to do and then nail down like where you want to go work that can do that. But it exposes you to so much and really allows you to see so much outside of just like the bubble that you might have had you gone in-house initially.
Yeah, absolutely. And Kritika, especially with your variety of interfaces that you've designed for, I'm really interested to hear sort of how both, like, of course, the processes evolve over the different types of interfaces, but the tooling and really like how you have found all of the different things available to you and how all of those things have changed throughout your various experiences that you've had.
Right. So I started with Excel sheets. So that's like my base. And then working with Samsung and Flipkart, these big companies, they really do not want to, have any third-party tools in their system. So they build their own. So what my experience has been like when I was working on Bixby Studio, and we have our in-house tool in Flipkart as well. So while working on that, I got an opportunity to actually build a tool because I was using it from a designer aspect. And I got to tell the developer that, hey, this particular feature is missing. That's what I would like to add. So at that time, voice flow and bot mock and bot societies were not very famous, but I realized that, hey, you know what? We are building this in-house tool. So for me, it was very easy to adapt those tools as well. And then when I moved to GeoHaptic, I completely used Lucid Charts. Those I really swear by Lucid Charts. I love it. And now as I'm evolving in my career, I believe Figma is really important. It really helps you visualize how your app is going to look and how the entire customer experience is going to be. So yeah, from Excel sheets to being a pro in Figma.
Yeah, there you go. And Shruti, do you use Figma? Because I know Instacart is an app for any people here who don't know. So is that the tools that you use, or I'm assuming at Apple, they probably have internal tools as well that you're using there.
Yeah. So Apple, it's all in-house and they use all their internal tools. But at Instacart, since we're a smaller company, we actually started just like how Kritika said, starting like with like Google Sheets and using FigJam to like whiteboard. And we're actually now moving over to using more conversational designer focused tools like VoiceFlow. To really give us all of the capabilities that we need. So yeah, we are slowly evolving our process as well.
Yeah. And I think that's a lot of with the maturity and the industry too. It's like, when I was starting out, all these tools were not available. You had like maybe one choice. You didn't have 15 choices of tools. So it's interesting to hear how it has changed. And Taylor, what about you at Interactions?
Yeah, well, I was gonna speak up and say that I'm actually like surprised to hear how many companies like develop their own proprietary design tools. Honestly, I expected more of the response to be like a bot mock or a voice flow. So I think it's really interesting, and Interactions is with the former, and that they developed their own conversation design tool that we've been using for like years now. For like UX and like UI work, like of course we use like Figma for that sort of thing, but for the actual like design of the conversation flows, it's all in our proprietary tool.
Yeah, it is very interesting because I think it may depend on a company by company basis of like, do you have the resources to develop your own internal tools? And like at my company, we decided long ago, like we don't want to get into the tooling space because we wanted to become a product. And so we have just sort of developed our own design process of me being the only designer. So I get to sort of pick what I want to use. And over time, I've used every different tool that is available, but have always sort of returned to my Excel spreadsheet, which I love. And certainly there's always talk about, is creating your own tool something that you should be doing? Is that where you want to invest your technical resources? And the answer is not always yes. In our case, the answer was not yes, because we wanted to invest those technical resources in the rest of the product. But for some, it is something that makes a lot more sense to own that. And I think especially with the shifts that have happened in the market in the past year of these tools shutting down, you can see why it would be very important for organizations to make that decision. I think that this conversation probably could be an entire hour conversation in itself, just of, if you should do that, and then how does it affect your career if you only know this company's internal tool and you don't know others? But that's another conversation for another day, right? So next, let's see who is answering this question. So how important do you think it is to have technical, data, and analytical skills as a designer? And Kritika, this is one that is for you first.
So it's not a yes and no question for me. I would say it depends on which stage are you in your career. If you're just a beginner and you want to break into the space, I don't think it's very important. Like, I don't think it would be a no for you if you don't know how to, analyze the data and everything. But if you really want to move forward in your career and you want to become an experienced designer, it's really important to understand who you're catering to. And it's not just going about like 100 of user utterances and understanding, oh, okay, maybe I'm missing this intent. That's not how it works. You need to go through a pool of like thousands and lakhs, millions of utterances and understand, okay, where my design is lacking, which kind of users are actually not understanding the flow that I have made. So if you are breaking into the space, I wouldn't say that, oh, you don't know how to work with Excel sheet in a proper manner and, extract the data that I'm looking for. That's why I can't hire you. I wouldn't do that. But if you want to get a promotion and become a senior or a lead, then definitely you need to have that understanding how to read the data that for the users you're catering to.
Yeah. And Shruti, I know that your initial experiences were sort of with that reading of data, machine learning, et cetera. So what do you think as far as how important it is for people to get these skills maybe in the beginning?
Yeah, this is a really good question. And my answer is very similar to Kritika's. I think like in short, like you don't need to have computer science or engineering experience to become a conversation designer. And I just want to say that first, because I don't want to turn off like other social science, humanities folks like myself from, pursuing conversation design. But I will say, I think it's helpful to have some sort of like a high level understanding of how AI is trained, not to know all the specifics, but generally knowing how the process of AI training will help you understand how to make a more efficient and more accurate chatbot that understands the user better. So like knowledge of like intents and entities, regular expression models, like that sort of thing would be really good to know, again, from a very high level. I don't want to turn off people from pursuing this career. And I think like being able to read, analyze, and summarize data is really important. And I think that's an important skill in most jobs nowadays too. You don't need to know how to use like R and do a regression model or anything like that, but just like being able to like read a graph or a chart and understanding like what parts of it are important and relevant, and being able to summarize it to your team, I think is a really important skill to have, because data helps us quantify the impact of our workflows and helps us know what we should improve and what we should do next. So tracking data on your key metrics, I think, is really important for that reason. And then speaking to my own research background, I think like understanding research methods is a skill that I think will serve you well. It's not like you have to have it or something, but depending on the size, depending on the size of your company, if you're like working at a really large company, there are of course entire teams dedicated to doing UX research. So you kind of just tell them what kind of questions you have, and then they'll execute the study and design the study and then share the data with you. But in a smaller company, or if you're working at a startup or at a lab, like how I started off, you have to do a lot of that yourself. So knowing how to outline a study, conduct it, analyze the results can be really important in that context. Even at a bigger company, I think even if there's a team dedicated to conducting research, you still need to be able to communicate what kind of data you want, what your research question is. You might even need to help them brainstorm ways to best test that question. So having some kind of like overall understanding of like data analysis, research, and some kind of high level technical understanding, I think would be helpful.
Yeah, I think understanding is really the key, or saying like, you have an analytical mindset, or, just being flexible, of course, to also learning things. I think that's super, super helpful. And I always tell people, like, if you are interested in it, absolutely learn those skills. But if it is something that's very difficult for you, just learning the basic terminology, learning the vocabulary, and learning how those things might apply to what you're doing, I think is just a really great place to start, at least.
Absolutely.
Just to add to that, I have felt that all these skills come in very naturally, because when you're at a stage where you're designing experiences, you yourself want to know like how users are reacting to it. You definitely want to read the data. And when you go to a developer and show your design and they say, no, that I can't implement this, you would want to know the reason why it's happening. And you'd like to come to a middle ground and be empathetic. Okay, I get it. What are the limitations, and I can work around it and create better experiences. I think it's the curiosity of a designer which will automatically incline towards technical and data skills as well.
Yeah, I absolutely agree.
Yeah, the curiosity to learn more is always important, I think. Okay, so the next question, this question was asked a lot, and I want to hear first, like from Shruti, just about like the internship to full-time and sort of how you can advocate for yourself, but also from a few others, just about when you're going into a role, or especially even when you're going into your first role, how do you prove yourself, and how do you sort of say, I'm ready to take this next step in my career?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so starting off as an intern, there were a few things that I learned, like after the internship, when I was trying to look for a full-time role. There were two things that I realized that I could really quantify, that could really help me move up. And those two things are one, explaining what I learned. So, or explaining how I learned. So that means like, I did this course, I read this article, I went to this conference, whatever. And then how something you've learned, you've applied to like improve a process or a product overall. And I think those two things are really, are much easier to quantify. So a lot of the way that I advocated for myself was just explaining like what I knew about the space, but also gaps I noticed within the space, just from like the research I had done, from the articles that I had read, and then identifying ways identifying gaps within that company's current process or product that could be improved, and what I could do about that. And I personally feel that as an intern or as an entry-level person at a company, it's easier to impact a process than a product. I think that teams are often used to doing things a certain way. So being a new person on the team, it's really easy to like bring a fresh perspective to processes, and teams often appreciate that. I think it shows initiative, it shows care for the processes and the documentation, which honestly a lot of people overlook, especially people who are more tenured at the company. And so I think, influencing process could look like improving your governance process, improving the documentation of your tool, or your design process. These are usually things that tend to slip between the cracks as folks work on different projects. And again, as an entry-level person, you have the perspective of someone who's just been onboarded. You've learned how to like use their tools and understand processes. So you're in a really good position to identify gaps and offer suggestions for improvement. And I think that's a good way to kind of like move up, and and throughout doing all this, to just continuously, like we've been saying, just to be curious and to learn. A lot of companies have like professional development budgets where you can do a course or buy books and all of that, and there's just a lot of different skills that you can work towards to help you move up.
Yeah, and even like in the interview process, like the things that you're saying of, show what you learned or talk about what you learned and how you learned it, these are things that you can put into your portfolio. So you can actually tell those stories and answer those questions, whether it's in your portfolio, in an interview, or even in like the first days of a role, of saying, these are the things that I did, this is how I did it. This is what I'm pursuing, and really just kind of tell this story for yourself in a portfolio where people don't need to talk to you in order to get that information. I think that's something that is really helpful, that from looking at a lot of portfolios, people tend to only talk about, I did these tasks, here's the work, here's the picture, but they're not really saying that this is what it took to actually get here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So Taylor, how would you say that, because I know you're, senior now and you have been working at Interactions for a while. So how did you sort of prove yourself or like know when it was time to go from UX designer to, senior designer?
Yeah, I think my answer would actually be really similar to Shruti. I think it has a lot to do with process, and being able to, as she said, identify like opportunities and room for growth. I also think that, and maybe this is a little bit like on the business side of things, like going back to like that work of like an internal advocacy. So much of that is again like your ability to like prove your case, right? Like justify your choices, and back up like the things that you're doing and the reasons why you're doing them. And I think those skills, and maybe they're, I don't want to call them business skills because I don't like that term, but like I think it has a lot to do with like soft skills. And I think those soft skills actually have a lot to do with moving up in your career. You could be, I don't know, you could be like the most qualified on paper, but if you're lacking those soft skills, that ability to like build consensus, to talk to other folks, I think it could all be for naught without those. And so I actually think it's my soft skills that helped elevate me into more senior roles.
Yeah, and it is, illustrating sort of leadership or illustrating that you are capable of taking on more than just the day to day, like more than just the task necessary to do the job. It's all the other things that sort of fall in between. So with proving yourself, Taylor, as I know that your team may be growing a little bit, what are some questions that conversation designers can expect to hear during interviews? I think this is something that is a little bit of a mystery to people. So I definitely would love to hear these.
Well, all right. So I'm going to harp on it again then. So process. I'm always going to ask about your process. That's going to be like the first thing out of the gate, probably. As we've said, I'm really less interested in the what and more interested in like how you got there. As a designer, I want to hear that you're using like user research and design thinking to like solve problems. So that process, that methodology is really important to me. Outside of that, and I've experienced a lot of different interview styles. The one that I'm most fond of and that I actually think works best when building a team tends to be like more interpersonal questions. Again, like you could have like the best portfolio in the world, but again, if those like soft skills or that emotional IQ is lacking, I think it's all for naught. So I like to ask things to understand like the person as an individual. Obviously, like what do you like to do outside of work? Like what are your ambitions? Where do you see yourself like a year from now? What's your like preferred style of management? How do you like handle a situation where someone disagrees with your design choices? Those all give me like a little bit more insight into you as like a person and again, that emotional IQ.
Yeah, and that's something that you can't necessarily gain from looking at someone's resume.
And you can't exactly teach it either, right? Like, we can teach a candidate how to use a new tool. We can't teach like attitude and fit and culture and that sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. That's something that is sort of, the person has done that on their own through their own history, etc. And Sarah, so I know that you recently started your role at Coinbase, but I'm assuming that you were interviewing a bit before as well. So what are some questions that you had heard during your interviews?
It really varies, I think, from company to company, because some companies have no clue what they're looking for.
Yeah.
And others are like have it down and know exactly what they need. So when I was first moving from freelancing and trying to get a full-time role, I would get really basic questions and maybe be asked to rewrite a couple of prompts, and that was it. But if I was interviewing with a company that had a more established conversation design team, as a junior, they were wanting me to know about intents, entities, maybe some UX writing, a little bit about how to work with an analyst and get into data. But when it comes into like mid-level roles and probably even senior roles, it gets more about like, how are you going to drive strategy? And what can you do with data? Are you going to be data driven in your decisions and what you're doing? And again, like, can you create systems and processes? And this kind of ties into like one of the other questions that you're going to ask us in a little bit, but I think like we're very early. I saw a report from Rasa maybe like a month or so ago, but they were saying that, you know, they're this group of like, you know, 50 companies and only X% of them actually have a chatbot in production, like they're actually actively working on it. And a lot of these companies are starting to think about how are we going to globally expand? And a lot of tools are not set up for that. So I think that's where a lot of questions and a lot of teams are starting to look, and where a lot of skill sets are going to be needed is like strategy and how to help these businesses achieve those like really broad, high level goals of their customer experiences globally.
Yeah, and really how we're past the days of like, we want this. It's like, now we have this. What are we going to do with it? How are we going to improve it? How are we going to grow it? And those are all sort of things that are more beyond just the basics of, can you do this? Do you know this tool or not?
Right. Yeah. It goes way beyond just like turn taking and dialogues, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so we only have a couple minutes left, so I'm actually going to join these next two questions together because they are very related. So a lot of questions about different certifications, but also about different degrees. So I am interested first, I think, Shruti, you did take a conversation design course.
Yeah.
Yes. So if you want to chat a little bit about, that, or also, do you think it's necessary? Do you think it was a necessary part of you landing your role? Because a lot of these courses are quite expensive. It is an investment for people to make in order to learn very specifically, how to do conversation design.
Yeah, absolutely. I can speak to this. So before working at Instacart, I did not take any courses or certifications. So almost all of my experience came from my internships. So if you have the opportunity to do an internship, I think that is really valuable. After joining Instacart, I've taken a couple courses on conversation design, but personally, I didn't feel like they were as helpful as I'd hoped. And I also did it on the company's dollar. So I wasn't really losing out on much, if it wasn't good or, so my advice would be not to spend your money on courses and certifications if you're not at a company that can pay for it. I think you can there are just so many other resources that are much cheaper or that are free. There are a ton of books on conversation design. There are some really good ones out there that will give you all the information that you need that these courses can provide you. And they're not super long, they're easy reads, and you can also read academic papers. I feel like a lot of people overlook those a lot, but they're free almost most of the time. And you can also read a lot of articles too. That's a lot of what I do. There are a ton of like Medium articles and like the websites that are dedicated towards conversational AI that have really great articles. So there's just so much free information out there on the internet that you can take advantage of. So I don't think you need to spend too much of your money on courses and certifications.
Yeah, and I think all of us here, so I do have a course. I just want to preface with that. However, all of us here did not take a course to get our first role in conversation design, right?
No.
So yeah, you're seeing here, people who have gone through the process and they did not take a course. Even though, like I said, I do have a course, I still advise people like, it's not something that is a requirement. It really is not. And it is helpful if you can get that professional development budget, or if there's something very specific that you're wanting to learn. Like, for example, my course is just about chatbot design, or there's courses that are just about AI training. Like, there's very kind of specialties, I think, that could be helpful if you want to sort of just jump ahead and get like a general process that you're going to follow. But most of the things out there you can learn on your own. You could learn it through academic papers. You could learn it through videos. I have hours and hours of videos, on my YouTube where you can get these types of answers to these questions. You can read different books, get them from the library. Like, there's definitely a lot of options, especially cost-effective options. So I think it's important to just, keep that in mind. We are not at the point where it's standard that you need to have a certification. I've seen maybe one or two job listings ever that have said that they want you to have a certification. So I think, it's not entirely necessary. And I would love to hear, like, Kritika, do you think that it is necessary for people to have an advanced degree. So like, do people, and Taylor as well, like, do people need to have a master's degree? Do they need to have a PhD in order to get to that next level, to lead a team or something like that?
I personally do not think so. My master's degree did open a door for me, but I believe if I were at a different position and I was looking for this particular job, I would have got it nonetheless. I don't think whatever I have learned in my master's, I'm using it 100% in what I'm doing today. I believe in practical experiences, and I believe that you need to have that, experience design, user design thinking in you. And if you have that and you can crack the design exercises that the companies are giving to you before hiring, I think that should be more than enough. And rest, all the things, whatever you get, you can learn on the job. And as Taylor said that, if you have the right soft skills, if you know how to communicate, if you know how to create a story for yourself, you'll get there. You don't need a certificate, you don't need a master's, and definitely not a PhD on that.
Yeah, I have to agree. Okay, we have time for like 0 more questions, but I do actually first. So I want to go down the line and just everyone name the top skill, maybe 2 top skills that you think designers must have to succeed in the field. And then I want to, give each of you a time to share anything that you need to update the group. So Kritika, do you want to share your top 2 skills that you think that people need to have?
I think the ability to understand the users you're catering to, and definitely, put it on paper and get that story out to someone else. Like, your design should be readable by the third person who's in the line. And it shouldn't be something that, oh, I have created this and that's that. Everyone should be able to read it. It should be intuitive, and the ability to understand your users. I think these are the 2 top most skills for me.
Okay. Taylor, how about you? What are your top 2 skills?
Yeah, I was going to say like advocacy, which is something I've been harping on all day, as well as, and you might not think of this as a skill, but I'm going to say curiosity. Like, I want someone, I think like open-mindedness, a curiosity to like keep learning, especially in our field, is really important.
Mm-hmm. Shruti, how about you?
I think it's important to always keep up with the research so that you always know what's possible and you know what the gaps, the technology gaps are, what the open questions are, what companies are doing in the field, and just stay up to date.
That's a really good one. Sarah, how about you?
I think understanding how your designs aren't just impacting a user or the customer experience, but business impacts as well is a really big deal, because we might not always think of that. And even, if you're placing a chatbot on a website, like, how does the content design of that website and the bot interact with one another is something I've seen businesses overlook as well. So being able to guide in those senses, I think, is a big deal, along with soft skills. Soft skills are huge.
Yeah, it is, all about the soft skills. I think especially as you get into more senior level and sort of like leadership type of roles, having those leadership skills is incredibly important. And that is something that you can practice outside of. It has nothing to do with conversation design, but it is having to do with leadership. It is having to do with, advancing yourself. Okay, so we'll skip over the last one. And I'm sorry, everyone, that we don't have time for more questions. But I do hope that you really enjoyed this. And I want to hand it over to Taylor for a second, because I believe that you have some news to potentially share with the people who are still able to hold on for the next couple of minutes.
Yeah, well, I'm just really excited to let the group know that Interactions is hiring actually 4 new conversation designers at various levels. So we currently have a team of nearly 20. So 4 is like a big addition, which is exciting. Anyway, so I just want to let folks know, if you're interested, feel free to drop me a message in LinkedIn. I am asking that you proactively include your resume and or portfolio, so that way you don't have to go digging for it. I will attempt to reply to as many people as possible. The actual jobs haven't been posted yet, but they'll be coming in the next couple of days. And once they are, I will send you a referral.
Yeah, so this is a both challenge and just some good news to everyone who is here. If you are looking for a role at any level, this is your opportunity to sort of make that connection. I just dropped Taylor's LinkedIn link in the chat. So if you want to just, put some thought into your message, put some thought into how can I connect and show the things that I have learned, show, my work, how can I give an example of myself based on, all the advice that you heard here today. I think that is something that is really cool. And there are 79 people here. So I would think that you'll at least get some people reaching out to you who are interested in this remote and global role, right?
Yep. Fully remote.
Fully remote. So that is awesome. And yeah, like I said, I just want to thank all of our panelists for being here today. Please connect with them on LinkedIn. I apologize for not being able to get to all of your questions. Everyone had some really amazing questions. So I would think too, if something came up for you specifically based on what people have said, send them a message. Don't be afraid to send us a message and ask your specific question, especially if something is really speaking to you about what they have said. I think that is really just a great idea. It's a really great opportunity, and maybe you will find a mentor out of it or resources to find a mentor, because I know quite a few people asked about that. So yeah, any of you have anything else that you would like to add before we sign off?
I'd like to say thank you to you for having this session.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And yeah, thank you all of you for being here. I really appreciate it. Everyone in the chat is, saying thank you and blowing you all up. So we hope that you will connect with us and that you will all keep learning. And I think that you will all find your next role in conversation design.